continue my 2010 team-by-team previews for the Big 12 Conference, and today we're talking Kansas State Wildcat football. Last year, the boys from Manhattan welcomed back an old friend, Bill Snyder, for his second tenure as Kansas State head coach, the guy whom the stadium is named after. Now, Snyder, when he took over in 1988, took over maybe the worst football program in the entire country. They were lucky able to even get one win per season. That changed though when Snyder arrived in what they call the Little Apple, Manhattan, Kansas. In 18 years at Kansas State, he won about as many ball games as Kansas State did before he got there, which was 53 years. That's right, first 53 years of Kansas State football, they barely won more games than Bill Snyder did in 18 years at the helm. That right there is coaching, big time coaching. Last season, at points, it looked like Snyder had never left because people in Manhattan were thinking about a Big 12 North championship. At the halfway mark of conference play, they were actually 3-1 and leading the Big 12 North. But then they ran out of gas the last 3 games of the season. The offense sputtered, and they ended up finishing 4-4 in league play and finished in 3rd place behind Nebraska and Missouri. And even worse for Kansas State, the schedule bit them in the rear end because they had scheduled 2 FCS schools. NCAA says that you can only count 1 FCS win toward bowl eligibility. Unfortunately for K-State, 2 of their 6 wins last year were against FCS competition, so they finished a win shy of bowl eligibility and thus had to stay home for the postseason, missing out on those extra practices as well as the bowl game experience. For Kansas State to finally get back to a bowl, which would be the first time since 2006 that they would do so, Kansas State cannot be just one-dimensional. We saw way too much of that in 2009, and in my opinion, the opposition toward the end of the season figured that out, and that's why Kansas State ran out of gas down the stretch. Daniel Thomas, though, he is probably the best running back in the Big 12, at least statistic-wise. Last season, he led the Big 12 in rushing. He's back, gained over 1,200 yards on the ground, 11 touchdowns, and the stat that sticks out to me the most, Thomas had a whopping 5-point-plus yards per carry. That's about half a first down per carry for Thomas. He returns. And even better news for Thomas, 4 of his offensive linemen are back. So very important that Kansas State takes advantage of that experience on the interiors. Now, not so good news for Kansas State. Carson Kaufman is at quarterback. I say it's bad news because last year he quarterbacked the first 4 games of the 09 season, but threw only 2 touchdowns and had 4 interceptions, and K-State lost 2 ball games in that month. Losing to UCLA might have been expected, but losing to Louisiana Lafayette was not. And I think that's what prompted Snyder to bench Kaufman in favor of Grant Gregory. And even though Gregory did not do a lot with his throwing ability, in fact, they didn't throw the ball a whole lot in 2009, he at least was able to do things on his feet. And it's amazing that K-State won 6 ball games last year considering how one-dimensional they were. Now Gregory's gone, and Kaufman gets a second chance to be starting quarterback, but you can bet that Coach Snyder will be ready to hook him if there is trouble early in the season. And yes, Kansas State does play UCLA again, but this time at least they get him in Manhattan. Talking about the receiving core for the Wildcats, I don't know if it's going to be as good as last year, especially when we consider that Brandon Banks, their speedster, is now gone. Very good receiver, but he was more dangerous as a kickoff returner. In fact, I think he had at least 5 returns last year for touchdowns. That dimension is gone. So now you're going to have Aubrey Quarles, who redshirted last year. They'll have his services along with Broderick Smith. You will see K-State line up in various formations. The Wildcat is one of them, but you'll also see them in some 4 receiver sets. We talked about Smith. We talked about Quarles. Also have to talk about another guy in the form of Chris Harper. I think these 3 guys should give Kaufman a pretty nice target throughout the season. Of course, the question is, can the K-State offensive line, which I thought did a good job run blocking in 09, but not so good of a job protecting the quarterback. That must improve if Kaufman is going to have success throwing the football. The defense for Kansas State, well, they line up in a 4-2-5 alignment. If you don't know what that is, that's 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs, including 3 safeties. The safety spot, this area is covered like a blanket for Kansas State. They'll be very good in this particular department. Emmanuel Lemure was the leading tackler returning for Kansas State. Maybe the most talented of the defensive backs, and he's going to have a shot at having all Big 12 accolades. Another guy that I think could really be serviceable for the Wildcats as far as another safety goes, and that would be the efforts of Tyson Hartman. Now, Hartman could very well leave after his junior season this year to go to the NFL. NFL scouts are salivating over this guy because he's a terrific cover guy. He can also hit you pretty hard as well. And another safety spot for the Wildcats, they will have Troy Butler. The linebacking core, another story for Kansas State. They lost both of their starters, so that really hurts. But the good news for Kansas State, they only line up with 2 linebackers, so they're not quite as dependent upon them as they would be the front 4 or the 5 defensive backs. Now, Kansas State on the defensive front did a good job in containing the run a year ago, but just did not get enough pressure on the QB. So they have to really improve in this department for Kansas State to get to 6 wins. And this year, keep in mind, if they can get to 6 victories, they would be bowl eligible because they only scheduled 1 FCS school. Let's highlight the FYIs for the Wildcats. First of all, number 1, obviously, Dan the Man. Daniel Thomas, again, has to be the workhorse for this team, especially if the pass protection is not there for Kaufman. Like I said, you're going to see Kansas State run out of various formations, and you can bet that Thomas is going to be utilized in more ways than just one. Pop quiz. Who is Kansas State's leading receiver as far as yardage coming back? You guessed it, it's the running back Daniel Thomas. That's kind of nice on one hand because you know that he's multidimensional, but on the other hand, you'd rather have a receiver occupy the role of being your number 1 receiver as far as yardage goes. Keep Daniel Thomas healthy and give him just a little bit of crease, and it should be another 1,000-yard season and multiple touchdowns for Mr. Thomas. Dan has to be the man for KSU. Number 2, of course, we talked about it, Carson Kaufman. The leash, I think, is going to be short on him if he does not have a productive September. K-State can ill afford to be dead last in the Big 12 for the 2nd straight year in passing yardage and passing efficiency. If Kansas State is going to be relevant in the Big 12, it can't just be all Daniel Thomas. I think Thomas has to be the main ingredient for that offense because of how good he is, but you have to be able to throw, and Kaufman has enough talent in the receiving cores to make good things happen, but the offensive line has to do their part as well. And finally, FYI number 3, the play of the cornerbacks. You no longer have Joshua Moore there. He went in the 5th round. He left early to be an NFL draft pick, and he got picked in the 5th round by the Chicago Bears. So it's almost like you're going to be starting at scratch from this area. Even though at times Kansas State had their moments in the secondary, they were still pretty vulnerable against the pass, especially against the likes of Oklahoma, as well as Missouri and Texas Tech. K-State got lit up in those games, so they need a little bit more consistency in the secondary. I think if the defensive line can do their part by getting pressure on the QB, I think you are going to see a Kansas State defense improve and improve quite noticeably. So for Kansas State, all eyes will be on that secondary, in particular the cornerbacks, where they lack some experience. Time now to highlight Kansas State's 2010 schedule, and it starts off with an opener against UCLA in the rematch from the previous season. UCLA should be better this year, but these are not the UCLA Bruins of the 1980s, which seemed like went to the Rose Bowl on a consistent basis. These Bruins are nothing like that, so the game is winnable. I'll go either or in that one. Then another home game for Kansas State. This one should be much easier as they'll play their first and only game this year against an FCS school. That's Missouri State, and that should be a win for Kansas State. Then the following week, September 18th, is a showdown, the opener, the Big 12 opener for both Kansas State and Iowa State. Last season, the teams played a pretty close game. In fact, Kansas State blocked an extra point with 30 seconds to go to preserve a 1-point win. The two teams will again meet in Kansas City. And then on September 25th, a game against Central Florida from Conference USA. Central Florida not expected to be one of the top teams in that conference, so you would think Kansas State at home should be able to handle Central Florida. Then Kansas State will get 12 days to prepare for their Big 12 home opener, but it's a tough one. On a Thursday night, nationally televised against Nebraska, K-State will have home field advantage, but it won't be enough. Nebraska will win. Then, 7 days later, another Thursday night game. This one, the Sunflower State battle between the Wildcats and the Kansas Jayhawks. That game in Lawrence, this one going either or. It's a rivalry game. October 23rd, K-State again on the road as they'll play at Baylor. Kansas State should win the game, but it's in Waco. And because K-State is one-dimensional, it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that Baylor could win this game. So I go either or in this one. October 30th is another either-or game as K-State back at home will take on Oklahoma State. The Cowboys are in a rebuilding year, so maybe Kansas State can get a win. I'll go either or. No either-or on the following game as K-State will host Texas, and I know the Wildcats defeated Texas back in 06 and 07, but that was when they had Josh Freeman at quarterback, and he could throw. Kansas State still hasn't proved to me that they can do that. Texas should win the game. November 23rd at Mizzou, I see as another loss. Missouri dominated K-State last year in Manhattan. I don't see the Wildcats winning in Columbia. November 20th at Colorado, another either-or game, being the high altitude at Folsom Field. We'll see if Kansas State can pull off a win, but can't guarantee it, so I'll go either-or. I will give K-State a victory in their final game of the year, which is out of conference, as they'll travel to Denton, Texas, to play the North Texas squad, UNT. A win there. Now, if you look at the worst-case scenario, Kansas State would have a rocky year at 3-9 if they lost all 6 of those swing games. Best-case scenario, they might name something else after Bill Snyder besides the stadium if they can go 9-3. But that's, of course, if all those swing games, which are 6 total, go in the Wildcats' direction. I see Kansas State, though, going 6-6, but I do see them at least getting to bowl eligibility to get a low-tier bowl game. But a low-tier bowl game is better than no-tier bowl game because you get those additional practices at the end of the year and a postseason game. And the more practice you can get, the better off you are. And for Kansas State, they're trying to progress. So at 6-6, they'll at least have a shot, a pretty good shot, at having postseason play. But I don't see them doing any better than third in the Big 12 North. Simply put, the top 2 teams in the North are much better than the bottom 4 teams in the North. K-State will finish third, but that's not exactly setting the world on fire.